Okay, so just as a preface, in this video I will go on to talk about how the Minneapolis City Council has voted to abolish the police department. That's actually not true. I misread the article. The people technically haven't voted yet, but the vast majority of the city council has said they will, and they just announced that at some big rally. So it's going to happen in due time. It just hasn't technically happened yet, but it's basically the same thing as them passing a meaningless resolution. Nothing concrete has happened yet. So just keep that in mind. And so I don't need you telling me in the comments. I know I misspoke, and I said they actually voted. They didn't vote yet, but they will. But everything else I say about the matter still applies, whether they've technically taken the step of voting or not. So I guess I'll let the audio begin now. Well, they've done it. They've actually gone and done it. The Minneapolis City Council has voted to abolish the police department. Now, the interesting thing about this is I decided very quickly when I saw that headline, wow, I've got to click on that and read more. I mean, what are they going to do? Are they going to implement one of the ideas that I talked about in my video earlier, speculating on how one could potentially abolish the police? Or are they going to do something crazy like I try and merge the Minneapolis Police Department with the FBI, which I think would be a disaster? And it turns out it's neither of those things. In fact, it seems to be nothing, because in this motion that they passed, they said, hey, we don't know how we're going to do it, but we're going to do it. Well, believe you me, there's going to be no police department in Minneapolis, but we have no idea how we're going to get rid of them. They said for now they're going to go through the budgetary channel, which I guess means just cutting their budget. Like that's going to help anything, I guess. I mean, I'm not against cutting the budget of government agencies, but that's not exactly a plan to abolish the police. Because abolishing the police is a very bold idea. That's something that most people have never thought about in their lives. So if you're making that case, you got to have some kind of substance there to back it up. I mean, if you're going to make a very, if you're going to proclaim a bold idea like that, you need to have some justification, don't you? You need to have some clear idea about what you want to do, not just, I want to get rid of them. Because the police departments across America have been in place for much longer than any of us, alive today have been around. So if there really is this movement of dedicated activists who want to abolish the police department, you would think they have some coherent ideas. Now, one thing I will give the Minneapolis City Council credit for, which actually did give me some optimism about what they're doing, is that their vague platitude that they put into their motion about what they'd like to see sounds somewhat similar to what I was describing a couple days ago. They said they wanted to move from the police department to some kind of local safety people or whatever, like neighborhood watch type folks. And I think that's a good idea. But of course, the devil's in the details. How do you implement that? I generally think that, these big major cities in America could benefit from a lot of decentralization, considering that, during the progressive era of the early 20th century, late 19th century, all of the institutions in our major cities were heavily centralized, and I think that did a lot of harm. It used to be that each school had its own school board that was elected from the community. Now you're lucky if you have a school board for your entire city. Mostly it's, in a lot of parts of the country, you have a county school board with just a handful of people on it. And those folks don't even really make real decisions most of the time because the state and federal government has so much control over the curriculum of education. And so decentralizing that would give, communities much more control over their children's education. Well, the same is true about the police. Before, the reform movement of the progressive era, you had, much smaller police departments, which were made up of members of the community, and who oftentimes, had elected leaders. And, over the period in that, 100 years ago or so, more than 100 years now, in big metropolitan areas, you would have all the smaller police departments united into one department that was controlled by the mayor, who appointed a chief of police. Many people probably don't know that New York City used to be just Manhattan, and that all of these boroughs outside of Manhattan were different cities. In fact, there were many cities even within the modern boroughs. And all of these places had their own smaller police departments, which are now subsumed under the giant NYPD. What is today the NYPD used to be the New York Metropolitan Police, who only, worked on the island of Manhattan. But now, policing in New York is anything but localized, and I'm sure it's a similar case in Minneapolis. I was looking at a map of Minneapolis today, and they have laid out, they have the city divided into communities and then neighborhoods below that. And there are 11 communities, and then in each community there's like 7 to 13 neighborhoods, I think. I might be inflating that number a little bit. But anyway, a very reasonable proposal if you wanted to, make policing less intrusive and I guess less conflicting with these communities, is to devolve the control of the police down to the community level and make it so that the only people who work as cops in these places are people from that community. And who knows, you might even be able to devolve it further down to the neighborhood level. But either way, you want whoever the leader is to be an elected official who has to face the electorate and is responsible for the actions of the police, so that if the police are committing crimes or doing bad stuff under that guy's watch, that he has to face that come election time. And if you devolve it down to the neighborhood level, he might even have to face it from these people because they're his neighbors, because he sees them in the supermarket. It might be just one, you have this essentially a small town sheriff kind of guy with a few deputies, and that's who, is the law enforcement agency in each of these neighborhoods. So I do see a way in which this could work out well, if they do things properly. But I mean, knowing the people involved with the Minneapolis City Council here and that mayor, Jacob Fry, I don't have much confidence that this is going to be implemented properly. In fact, just a day or two ago, Jacob Fry was, shown on social media, bowing to the mob and trying to apologize for being a white person. And then, the mob asked him, so are you going to can you commit to abolishing the police? And he said no, and they chased him off. So, I mean, I don't know what's changed. I know that he's not on the city council because he's the mayor, but does the mayor have veto power? Or is he now going to have to implement the abolition of the police department after publicly opposing it, in the face of a mob? But something we should expect now that Minneapolis has pulled the trigger, because they've now, they're now the first ones to do this. This is going to gain steam, and other cities around the country are going to have similar measures. So this is going to become a movement. Now, again, if this makes manifest as a movement to decentralize the police, and hopefully other city institutions later, maybe even state and federal institutions, decentralize those, that could be something very positive. So I don't want to be all doom and gloom, because, of course, I've not been very supportive of the protesters themselves personally. I wouldn't want to be out in the streets with these people. I generally think that, they're rather unsavory elements, the people who are torching buildings and saying that, that's justifiable and whatnot. And, of course, just the blatant racialism of the people just blaming whitey, as if the cops don't beat up white folks or Mexicans or Asians or whoever else. But I'm holding out some hope at this point that, something good might come of all this. Either way, if we're talking about getting rid of cops, that is great news for the Second Amendment. Because, of course, cops are the folks that enforce gun laws. So if we have less cops, that'll help, people who are into guns. And, of course, it will increase support for gun rights across the country if people are scared that the cops aren't going to help them. And even if we don't have total bedlam and we are able to transition away from having professional police to more community-oriented security forces, well then, who's going to make up those security forces? Ordinary civilians. So you're going to have, you're not going to have this very bold line between law enforcement who are supposed to have guns because they're trained, and the ordinary citizen who shouldn't. I mean, imagine if we had something like the Swiss Army of policing. In Switzerland, of course, everyone is armed and keeps a rifle in their house, because the idea is that if Switzerland ever gets invaded, you need to take up arms to defend the country. But Switzerland doesn't have much of a formal standing army in the way that the United States does, stationed in every country around the world. If we had something similar to this when it comes to policing, if everyone essentially was, or if a lot of people, large percentage of the population was deputized to some extent, and was armed and was trained in de-escalation tactics or things like that, little things to where they could handle situations in their own community, where you had lots of people instead of a small minority of just a few cops, then I think that, again, that would be a very positive development in American society. Because you wouldn't have that bold line between the police and the civilians. You would have the civilians policing themselves. So with that said, if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.